August 11, 2002, 14:30 Greenwich Mean Time, 6,000 yards off the coast of Normandy, France. On the dimly lit bridge of the research vessel Odyssey, marine archaeologist James Delgado, a leading expert from the Institute of Nautical Archaeology, leaned closer to a flickering monitor, the low, electronic hum of the Kongsberg Mesotech side-scan sonar filling the tense silence. He was methodically surveying the seabed 100 feet below when a ghostly, unmistakable shape resolved itself from the digital noise. It was the complete, turret-forward silhouette of an M4A1 Sherman tank, standing upright in the cold darkness as if waiting for an order that never came. A profound, chilling awe washed over him. He was looking at the first physical proof of a 58-year-old secret, a sunken tomb from a D-Day catastrophe that the enemy had never even known happened. This weapon's journey from impossible idea to battlefield reality began in the mind of Major General Percy Cleghorn Stanley Hobart. A 1904 graduate of the Royal Military Academy, Woolwich Hobart was a brilliant, abrasive and often insubordinate tanker who lived and breathed unconventional warfare. Sporting a meticulously trimmed mustache that seemed to bristle with impatience, he was known for constantly sketching complex tactical diagrams on napkins and map margins. After being forced into retirement in 1940, he was brought back by Prime Minister Winston Churchill himself to command the top-secret 79th Armored Division. Hobart knew that a conventional assault against Field Marshal Erwin Rommel's 500,000 coastal obstacles was a recipe for annihilation. He needed something more than just a tank. He needed a miracle of engineering, a weapon so audacious the Germans wouldn't just be unprepared for it, they wouldn't even be able to comprehend it. That miracle came not from a soldier but from a civilian inventor with ink-stained fingers, and a mind that operated on a different plane of physics. Nicholas Peter Sorel Straussler, a Hungarian-born British engineer and a 1913 graduate of the Budapest University of Technology and Economics, was a prolific genius with over 150 patents to his name. Often seen in a rumpled tweed jacket with his glasses perched precariously on his forehead, Straussler had a habit of tapping a fountain pen against his teeth while pondering complex flotation problems. In 1941, he filed UK patent number 549-422, a deceptively simple design for a collapsible, waterproof canvas screen that could turn a 33-ton armored vehicle into a seaworthy vessel. It was this blueprint, born in a quiet workshop smelling of oil and old paper, that would be handed to Hobart. Overseeing its eventual American deployment was Lieutenant General Omar N. Bradley, a stoic 1915 West Point graduate whose calm demeanor masked a willingness to take calculated, and sometimes catastrophic, risks. The strategic imperative was brutal and simple. The entire success of Operation Neptune, the D-Day landings, hinged on the first 30 minutes. Veterans of the German 352nd Infantry Division waited inside concrete fortresses like Widerstands Nest 62. Their MG-42 machine guns sighted on the exact stretches of sand where Allied infantry would be most vulnerable. Standard landing craft, tank, LCTs, were too slow and too big. They would be obliterated before their ramps could even drop. The planners at SHAEF, including General Dwight D. Eisenhower, understood that without immediate, overwhelming armored support arriving with the very first wave of infantry, Omaha Beach would become a slaughterhouse. They needed tanks on that beach the moment the first boots hit the sand, a tactical impossibility by any known standard of 1944. Before I tell you how Major General Percy Hobart and his secret 79th Armored Division managed to make a 33-ton Sherman tank swim across the treacherous English Channel, comment below where you're watching from, and be sure to subscribe to the channel. Believe me, you won't want to miss the full story of the Neptune deception and the swimming tanks of D-Day. By early 1944, the situation on the French coast was grimly static. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, a brilliant tactician appointed by Adolf Hitler in November 1943 to inspect the Atlantic Wall, had transformed it into a death trap. Over 500,000 obstacles littered the shoreline, backed by the hardened veterans of the German 352nd Infantry Division. From inside concrete bunkers like Wehrmacht's Nest 62, their MG-42 machine guns, capable of firing 200 rounds per minute, were pre-sighted on the beaches, the cold North Sea wind whistling over their fortifications. The Allied High Command was haunted by the ghost of a previous disaster. The Dieppe raid of August 19, 1942, had been a bloodbath, with over 623 of the 6,086 men who made it ashore killed, wounded, or captured in just 9 hours. Supreme Allied Commander General Dwight D. Eisenhower and the Chief of the Imperial General Staff, Field Marshal Sir Alan Brooke, knew from this failure that a conventional amphibious assault was suicide. Standard landing craft, tank, LCTs, like the 119-foot-long Mark V, were slow, unarmored targets moving at a mere 10 knots. They would be annihilated by German 88mm guns before a single tank could roll onto the sand, a fact confirmed in grim detail by casualty reports from the raid. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, as Commander-in-Chief West, held ultimate authority, but it was Rommel's frantic, hands-on approach after his appointment on November 5, 1943, that instilled a new level of lethality into the defenses. He ordered the installation of millions of mines and thousands of Czech Hedgehog anti-tank obstacles, each a 1.5-ton behemoth of welded steel girders. The bunkers of Wehrmacht's Nest 62, commanded by Oberleutnant Bernhard Furking, featured concrete walls over 2 meters thick, specifically engineered to withstand naval shells from battleships like the U.S. Texas. The men of the 352nd Infantry Division, under the command of General Lieutenant Dietrich Krase, were not conscripts. Many were seasoned veterans from the Eastern Front, drilled to perfection by March 1944. The air in their bunkers was a stale mix of damp concrete, body odor, and simmering dread. On the American side, the weight of the impending assault fell heavily on Lieutenant General Omar N. Bradley. A quiet, unassuming 1915 West Point graduate, Bradley commanded the 1st United States Army. In early May 1944, his G2 intelligence chief, Colonel Benjamin A. Monk Dixon, presented him with the casualty projections for the sector codenamed Omaha Beach. The numbers were horrifying. A 70% loss rate for the first wave of the 29th Infantry Division, without immediate, overwhelming armored support. The cold black and white print of the report felt like a death sentence for thousands of his men. The problem was physics. A standard M4A1 Sherman tank weighed 33 tons. Getting it from sea to shore under fire was a tactical nightmare. The U.S. Navy's landing craft, tank, LCT, specifically the LCT-5 and LCT-6 models, could carry 4 tanks apiece, but they were lumbering targets powered by 3 225-horsepower Gray Marine diesel engines. The disastrous Operation Tiger training exercise at Slapton Sands on April 28, 1944, which resulted in 749 American deaths, proved just how vulnerable these flotillas were. Rear Admiral Alan G. Kirk, commander of the Western Naval Task Force, knew his LCTs would have to beach themselves directly in the sights of German artillery, making them little more than floating coffins. The sound of their engines was an alarm bell for any spotter on the coast. This is where the sheer eccentric genius of Major General Percy Cleghorn Stanley Hobart came into play. His 79th Armored Division, officially formed on August 14, 1942, was a unit unlike any other in the entire Allied order of battle. It was a traveling circus of mechanical monstrosities known as Hobart's Funnies, designed for every conceivable battlefield problem. Hobart, a man who constantly chewed on an unlit pipe and wore a distinctive black Royal Tank Regiment beret, pushed his engineers and designers with a relentless, often abrasive, energy. At his headquarters at Theberton Hall in Suffolk, The air smelled of welding fumes and damp earth, as his chief of staff, Brigadier N.W. Duncan, helped him oversee the development of crab flail tanks for mine clearing and crocodile flamethrower tanks, all based on the robust Churchill tank chassis. The men tasked with operating these secret weapons, like the troopers of the American 741st and 70th Tank Battalions, were kept in total darkness. Pulled from their regular armored units in late 1943, they were transported to isolated training camps in southern England. There, under threat of court-martial for violating the Official Secrets Act, they were told they were part of a program so secret it didn't have a public name. The psychological strain on these young men, many barely out of their teens, was immense, living for months with a secret they couldn't share, even with their closest comrades in other units. The primary crucible for this secret was a desolate, 3-mile stretch of coastline in Dorset known as Area X at Studland Bay. Chosen in late 1943 for its striking resemblance to the Normandy beaches, the entire area was sealed off by the elite commandos of the 1st Special Service Brigade, commanded by the formidable Brigadier Lord Lovett. All training exercises were conducted in the freezing, pitch-black hours between 2 o'clock and 5 o'clock, deliberately timed to avoid the prying eyes of Luftwaffe reconnaissance aircraft. Instructors like Captain Desmond Fitzgerald, a veteran of the North African campaign, had the surreal task of teaching seasoned tank drivers how to navigate a 33-ton steel box through choppy 4-foot waves using only a crude tiller and a small periscope. The technology itself, born from the mind of Nicholas Straussler, was an elegant but terrifyingly fragile solution. The duplex drive system relied on a 3.2-meter-high waterproof canvas screen, supported by 36 inflatable rubber tubes and a flimsy steel frame. This screen could be raised in 15 minutes using compressed air. However, a top-secret Royal Engineers report from March 2, 1944, written by a Major T.H.G. Howard, explicitly stated the system's critical vulnerability. In waves exceeding just 12 inches, see State 3, the screen would flood, and the tank would sink in under a minute. The tank's 400-horsepower Wright R975 Whirlwind engine powered two 28-inch propellers, pushing the vehicle through the water at a sluggish 4.1 knots, making every crew member acutely aware that they were one rogue wave away from drowning. This entire clandestine operation was shielded by a masterpiece of strategic misdirection, Operation Fortitude. Orchestrated by Colonel John Bevan of the London Controlling Section and the XX Committee. This grand deception plan convinced the German High Command that the main Allied invasion would target Pas-de-Calais. They created a Phantom Army, the first United States Army Group, FUSAG, complete with inflatable Sherman tanks, dummy landing craft, and fraudulent radio traffic broadcast under the authority of the famous General George S. Patton. This ruse successfully fixated the formidable German 15th Army, holding them in place hundreds of miles from Normandy. The German intelligence apparatus was completely blind. The Abwehr, led by Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, had been thoroughly penetrated by the British double-cross system. Double agents like the brilliant Spaniard Juan Pujol Garcia, codenamed Garbo, fed the Germans a carefully curated diet of misinformation. By May 1944, there were simply no reliable German intelligence assets operating in the south of England who could report on the strange, nocturnal amphibious exercises at Studland Bay, or the unusual modifications being made to Sherman tanks at depots like Tidworth Camp. The very idea of a swimming tank was so absurd, it would have been dismissed as propaganda anyway. Consider the men of the U.S. 741st Tank Battalion, commanded by the determined Lieutenant Colonel William D. Bill Price. After arriving in the UK in November 1943, they were abruptly reassigned in February 1944 to begin DD training. Alongside their British counterparts from the 13th/18th Royal Hussars, they learned the grueling 48-hour process of waterproofing their M4A1s with a thick, tar-like goo called Prestwood. A young NCO named Sergeant Bill Feller would later recall the constant nauseating smell and the bone-chilling fear during practice launches in Poole Harbor, the sound of the cold seawater slapping against the thin canvas screen just inches from his head. They were tankers, not sailors, and they were being asked to pilot 33-ton death traps across the world's most treacherous channel. The die was cast on April 1, 1944. General Bernard Montgomery, the ground forces commander for the invasion, signed off on the final assault plan for Operation Neptune. This plan explicitly called for 32 DD tanks from the 741st Battalion to land with the 1st Assault Wave of the 16th and 116th Regimental Combat Teams on Omaha Beach. The lives of 156,000 Allied soldiers on D-Day would hinge on the success of this secret weapon in the first 20 minutes of each hour. This placed an almost unbearable burden of decision on General Omar Bradley. On board his flagship, the U.S. Augusta, in the final days of May 1944, he reviewed the conflicting plans. British liaison officers, like Major W.D.C.L. Purves, who had personally witnessed the DD tank trials, passionately argued against launching any further than 3,000 yards from shore. But the U.S. Navy's plan, desperate to keep its vulnerable LCTs out of the 5-mile range of German coastal batteries, demanded a launch point 6,000 yards out to sea. The air in the war room was thick with cigar smoke and the scent of stale coffee as Bradley weighed the risk to his tankers against the risk to the Navy's fleet. And so, as the final hours of May 1944 ticked away, the stage was set for a tragedy of epic proportions. On the French coast, the soldiers of the 352nd Infantry Division, under General-Lieutenant Dietrich Kress, felt secure behind Rommel's wall of steel and concrete, scanning an empty horizon. They had no concept of the amphibious monsters being loaded onto LCTs in ports like Dartmouth and Salcombe. In England, thousands of Allied tankers performed their final, ritualistic checks on the 36 rubber tubes and twin propellers of their swimming Shermans, a secret weapon born from the minds of Major General Percy Hobart and Nicholas Straussler, its fate now resting entirely on one crucial command decision and the unforgiving waves of the English Channel. The entire audacious concept began not on a battlefield, but on a piece of paper filed in a quiet London office. In 1941, Nicholas Peter Sorel Straussler, the Hungarian-born engineer with a mind that saw solutions where others saw only problems, submitted UK patent number 549-422. It was a brilliantly simple design for a collapsible flotation screen. This blueprint, smelling faintly of ink and possibility, eventually landed on the desk of Major General Percy Hobart at the Ministry of Supply, who secured an initial development budget of £10,000 from the War Office to turn Straussler's theory into a terrifying reality. The first test wasn't with a 33-ton Sherman, but with a much lighter 17-ton Valentine infantry tank. On a miserably gray day in June 1941 at Hindon Reservoir, engineers from the Metropolitan Camel Carriage and Wagon Company watched nervously. Nicholas Straussler was there himself, his rumpled tweed jacket damp from the drizzle, tapping a pen against his teeth as the modified tank, fitted with a crude canvas screen, chugged into the water. The sound of its 131-horsepower AEC diesel engine straining was drowned out by the anxious shouts of the engineers. It floated, proving the core concept, but it was dangerously unstable, wallowing in the gentle wake of the support boats. The test was a success, but a fragile one, revealing just how many engineering hurdles, from ballast to propulsion, still remained before it could be considered a weapon. This is where Major General Percy Hobart's obsessive drive took over. After the official formation of his top-secret 79th Armored Division on August 14, 1942, he saw the duplex drive not just as a tool for crossing rivers, but as the key to unlocking Fortress Europe. With the personal backing of Prime Minister Winston Churchill, Hobart secured a massive budget increase of over £250,000 and established a clandestine development and testing facility at Fritton Lake, Norfolk. He brought in his unflappable chief of staff, Brigadier N.W. Duncan, a logistics expert from the Royal Army Service Corps, to manage the airtight security. The entire area was a 2-mile-deep exclusion zone, patrolled day and night. The first tests there in early 1943 used small Tetrarch light tanks, their tracks churning up the mud at the water's edge, the air thick with the smell of pine and diesel exhaust. As Hobart demanded, they pushed the prototypes harder, faster, and into rougher water. The pivotal decision came in late 1942. The system had to be adapted for the American M4 Sherman. This was a monumental leap. The Sherman's 33-ton combat weight and powerful 400-horsepower Wright R975 Whirlwind radial engine presented entirely new challenges for buoyancy and propulsion. Lieutenant General Sir Gifford LeCaine Martel, a respected tank pioneer, wrote a skeptical memo on December 5, 1942, questioning if the tank's transmission could handle the torque required to power 2 propellers. Hobart, chewing on his unlit pipe, simply saw it as another problem to be solved, another wall to be smashed through by sheer force of will. The first M4A1 Sherman, converted with the full duplex drive system, was ready by April 1943, and trials began at Fritton Lake on April 15th. The process itself was a marvel of battlefield engineering. A 5-man crew from the Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers, led by Captain G.L. Jones, would spend nearly 48 hours meticulously applying a thick, black, tar-like waterproofing sealant called Prestwood to every seam and rivet on the tank's hull. Then came the 3.2-meter-high canvas screen, supported by 36 inflatable rubber tubes and a complex steel frame. The hiss of compressed air filling the tubes was the signal that the 33-ton beast was ready. Nicholas Strausler worked side by side with the engineers, refining the power takeoff that drove the twin 28-inch propellers, their blades churning the murky lake water into a muddy foam. With the core technology finally proven reliable, the entire operation shifted in January 1944 to a new, even more secret location, Area X, at Studland Bay, Dorset. This heavily guarded, 3-mile stretch of coastline was a near-perfect topographical match for the planned Normandy landing zones. The security was absolute. Brigadier Lord Lovett and his elite 1st Special Service Brigade commandos established a lethal perimeter of barbed wire, machine gun nests, and 24-hour patrols, their faces grim under their green berets. The entire project was now classified under the Bigot security level, a designation so secret that even its name was classified. It was here that the American crews of the 741st and 70th Tank Battalions arrived, utterly bewildered. They were stripped of their unit insignia, forbidden from writing home, and told only that they were part of a program that could win or lose the war in a single day. The air tasted of salt and fear. The training regimen at Area X was a unique form of hell, designed to forge sailors out of tankers. To avoid the prying eyes of Luftwaffe reconnaissance flights that scoured the English coast daily, every single training launch was conducted in the freezing, disorienting darkness between 2 o'clock and 5 o'clock hours. In these conditions, a young tank commander had to navigate 33 tons of steel through 4-foot waves, using only a tiny, spray-lashed periscope. Lieutenant Colonel William D. Bill Price, commanding the 741st, secretly logged on February 12, 1944, that 3 of his best non-commissioned officers had to be removed from the program due to severe claustrophobia and recurring nightmares of drowning in the dark. The crews drilled the operational procedures until they became muscle memory. The most critical part was the transition from sea to land. On hitting the beach, the commander would yank a steel lever that fired a series of small explosive bolts. With a sharp crack, these charges would sever the screen's main steel supports, causing the entire 3.2-meter canvas structure to collapse in less than 10 seconds. This allowed the 75mm M3 main gun and 2.30 caliber Browning machine guns to be brought into action almost instantly. Every crew also lived with the grim knowledge of security protocol Bigot Neptune/Armor DD-1. They were issued 2 M1 thermite grenades and given explicit orders. If your tank is disabled and at risk of capture, you burn it. The acrid smell of practice thermite was a constant reminder that the secret was more valuable than the machine, and perhaps even their own lives. The financial and industrial scale of Project Duplex Drive was staggering. By early 1944, the program's cost, hidden across dozens of secret Ministry of Supply budgets, exceeded £3 million, a colossal sum. The development involved not just Hobart's 79th Division, but also top minds from the Royal Navy's Department of Miscellaneous Weapon Development. This secretive group, led by the brilliant scientist Sir Charles Goodeve, was responsible for perfecting the rubberized canvas material, ensuring it could withstand not just saltwater corrosion, but also shrapnel from near-miss artillery shells. Dozens of early prototypes were deliberately sunk during extreme weather tests in the deep, cold waters of Loch Striven in Scotland, their locations kept on classified naval charts to ensure the secret would remain at the bottom of the sea. Brigadier N.W. Duncan masterminded the logistics, coordinating the production of over 500 DD conversion kits from factories in Coventry, all shipped in crates deceptively labeled agricultural flotation systems. By the first week of May 1944, the secret was battle-ready. Over 600 American and British tank crews had endured the terrifying nocturnal training at Studland Bay. Hundreds of duplex drive Shermans, their strange canvas screens folded and hidden beneath heavy tarpaulins, sat waiting in sealed marshalling areas across southern England. Major General Percy Hobart and Nicholas Straussler had achieved the impossible. They had turned a 33-ton tank into a boat, creating a weapon so far outside the enemy's comprehension that its existence was protected by a shield of sheer absurdity. The Neptune deception was complete. The complete and utter blindness of the German High Command was a weapon in itself, meticulously crafted by Allied counterintelligence. In the last week of May 1944, at his headquarters in Zossen, Oberst Alexis von Rohn, the sharp-witted head of Fremde Heer West, Foreign Armies West, dismissed a vague Abwehr report of unusual amphibious exercises in Dorset. Hunched over a map smelling of stale cigar smoke and pine-scented floor polish, he confidently assessed it as more noise from Operation Fortitude, the grand deception pinning his eyes, and the entire German 15th Army squarely on Pas-de-Calais. He had absolutely no reason to think otherwise. That confidence was the direct result of a phantom army. The fictional 1st United States Army Group, FUSAG, supposedly commanded by the fearsome General George S. Patton, was given life by the masterminds of the London Controlling Section, including Colonel John Bevan. At a lonely listening post near Cap Gris-Nez, a young radiotelegraphist, Unteroffizier Klaus Richter, spent the night of June 4, 1944, meticulously logging hundreds of coded messages. The transmissions, broadcast on the 6,970 kilocycle frequency, carried the distinct fist of American operators and spoke of Patton's 50 divisions preparing to cross the channel. Richter, feeling the damp chill of the concrete bunker seep into his bones, was utterly convinced. The sheer volume of this fake radio traffic, which peaked in the first week of June, was the linchpin holding 19 German divisions in place, hundreds of miles from the real target. The deception ran deeper still, poisoning the very well of German intelligence. In Madrid, Oberleutnant Karl Erich Kuhlenthal of the Abwehr considered the Spanish agent codenamed Garbo his most prized asset. He didn't know Garbo was actually Juan Pujol Garcia, a brilliant double agent controlled by the British XX Committee. On the evening of June 5, 1944, at 2200 Greenwich Mean Time, Kuhlenthal received an urgent radio message from Garbo, transmitted via a clandestine shortwave set. The message was unequivocal. The impending landings in Normandy were a large-scale feint, designed solely to draw German reserves away from Pas-de-Calais, where the real invasion would strike within days. Kuhlenthal, smelling the strong Spanish coffee brewing on his desk, felt a surge of relief and immediately forwarded the intelligence to Berlin with his highest endorsement. The lie was swallowed whole, becoming official German doctrine just hours before the invasion. At 5:50 on June 6, 1944, shivering in the pre-dawn gloom of Widerstandsnest 62, Gefreiter Hans Schmidt swept the horizon with his heavy Zeiss 10x50 binoculars. He watched the massive flotilla of Allied ships come to a halt, much farther out than expected, nearly 6,000 yards. He saw the ramps of the landing craft tank, LCTs, go down. But instead of tanks, he saw only small, dark, canvas-shrouded shapes drop into the churning 6-foot waves. The sound was a distant, indistinct rumble, swallowed by the wind and the roar of the sea. He reported what he saw. No armor was approaching the beach. Miles out at sea, the crew of LCT 595, under the command of Lieutenant R.L. Ringer, felt their vessel lurch violently. At precisely 5:40, they had launched the first of 2 DD tanks from the 741st Tank Battalion. The deafening roar of the tank's 400 horsepower Wright R975 Whirlwind engine was followed by a sickening splash as the 33-ton machine hit the water, its fragile canvas screen immediately battered by the waves. The air was thick with the acrid smell of diesel exhaust and cold saltwater spray. Lieutenant Colonel William D. Bill Price, commanding the battalion, watched in horror from his own command craft as the first of his swimming tanks vanished beneath the waves. The operation was already a catastrophe. Inside his M4A1, Sergeant Bill Feller felt the icy Atlantic pour over the top of the canvas screen, which was only designed to handle 12-inch waves. The interior of the tank plunged into a roaring, watery darkness. The lights failed, and the sound was a terrifying torrent of water flooding the compartment, shorting out the -508 Seychelles rupees radio. In less than 60 seconds, the 33-ton tank was on its way to the seabed, 100 feet below. Feller and his driver, Corporal John S. McKendry, fought against the immense water pressure to force open the 50-pound escape hatches. They were among the few who made it out alive. Of the 29 tanks launched by the 741st Battalion so far from shore, 27 sank like stones, taking 111 crewmen with them. Back on Omaha Beach, Oberleutnant Bernhard Firking, commander of Widerstandsnest 62, felt the ground shake as the first shells from the U.S. Texas began to fall. He peered through the concrete slit of his command bunker and saw waves of American infantry struggling ashore, but his initial assessment held true. He got on the field telephone to the headquarters of General Lieutenant Dietrich Krase, commander of the 352nd Infantry Division, his voice strained but clear. His report, logged at 6:35, was chillingly simple. Enemy infantry landing in force along the entire sector. No armor has been sighted on the beach. The story was completely different, just a few miles down the coast. At Utah Beach, the sea was significantly calmer. At 6:15, Lieutenant Colonel John C. Wellborn of the 70th Tank Battalion gave the order to launch just 3,000 yards from shore. High above on one of the only Luftwaffe sorties of the day, Oberleutnant Josef Pips Priller of Jagdgeschwader II banked his Focke-Wulf 190 for a strafing run. He saw the wakes in the water below, but reported seeing only, quote, strange floating tarpaulins. His mind utterly unable to process the image of tanks swimming toward the shore. 27 of the 28 DDs from Companies B and C churned steadily onward, their twin 28-inch propellers pushing them through the gentle swell. In a German pillbox designated WN5 overlooking Utah Beach, Oberschütze Dieter Heinz of the 919th Grenadier Regiment braced himself behind his MG-42 machine gun. He had a perfect field of fire and expected a turkey shoot, but at 6:45 his blood ran cold. He watched, stupefied, as what looked like a monstrous steel beast rose from the surf, its wet canvas collapsing around it with a series of sharp, explosive cracks. Before Heinz could even fully register what he was seeing, The tank's 75mm M3 gun swiveled and fired a single high-explosive round. The world dissolved in a flash of light and concrete dust. The baffling reports of tanks driving out of the sea that reached General Major Wilhelm Falley of the 91st Infantry Division were dismissed by his staff as the panicked exaggerations of terrified soldiers. 50 miles inland at his headquarters in La Roche-Guyon, General-Lieutenant Hans Spadel, Field Marshal Rommel's chief of staff, was trying to make sense of the chaos. The reports coming in were a maddening contradiction. Omaha was a bloody stalemate with no enemy armor. Utah was a swift breakthrough led by tanks that had appeared from nowhere. The intelligence picture was completely fractured. There was no precedent, no doctrine, no explanation for how tanks could be on one beach with the first wave and completely absent from another. The German command structure was paralyzed by confusion. In the damp, musty basement of the Chateau d'Agneau, Lieutenant Erich Fischer of the B-Dienst Signals Intelligence Unit pressed his headphones tight against his ears, the crackle of static a constant hiss. The air smelled of ozone from the overheated Telefunken radio receivers. He was monitoring the U.S. First Army's command net, and the traffic was schizophrenic. From the Omaha sector, he intercepted panicked, uncoded pleas from the 29th Infantry Division. "We're being pinned down, need armor support now, we are being slaughtered." But, from the Utah sector, the transmissions on the same -508 Seychelles rupees radio sets were calm, professional, and terrifyingly efficient. Able company tanks have neutralized WN5. Proceeding to objective red. The how was a complete mystery. The secret was kept even after capture. On June 7th, a wounded tanker from the 70th Battalion, Sergeant James Powell, was interrogated near St. Mary-Église by the exhausted but still sharp Hauptmann Werner Pluskat of the 352nd Division's artillery. Powell, a farm boy from Ohio who had been sworn to secrecy under the bigot oath, stuck to his pre-rehearsed cover story. He claimed his tank was landed by a new, faster type of LCT that beached and retracted in seconds. Pluskat, the very officer who had first spotted the invasion fleet, had no reason to doubt him. The interrogation room smelled of damp stone and antiseptic, and the lie was easier to believe than the impossible truth. The Germans logged it as a new Allied landing craft, not a new type of tank. By the evening of June 6, 1944, the damage was done. From his Zossen headquarters, Oberst von Rohn submitted his formal intelligence assessment to the German High Command, OKW. It confidently stated that the Normandy landings, despite their scale, were a diversionary attack. His analysis, backed by Garbo's false intelligence, insisted that the main Allied blow, led by Patton's FUSAG, was still aimed at Pas-de-Calais, and would fall within the next 48 to 72 hours. This singular, catastrophic miscalculation kept the entire 15th Army, with its 19 battle-ready divisions and over 300 tanks, frozen in place. Even as the Allied beachhead in Normandy grew, the secret of the duplex drive tanks remained submerged. German technical intelligence teams, including units led by the meticulous Oberstleutnant Rudolf H. Wernitz, examined the battlefield wreckage. They saw knocked-out Shermans near the shoreline and assumed they had been destroyed while disembarking from conventional landing craft. The heaps of collapsed, oil-stained canvas and steel frames were dismissed as discarded tarpaulins or random debris, indistinguishable from the other flotsam of war. The secret's greatest defense wasn't the armed guards at Studland Bay. It was its own sheer, unbelievable absurdity. The ultimate proof of German ignorance lay in the silence of their own navy. In the days leading up to the invasion, Captain Lieutenant Herbert Nolau of U-505 patrolled the English Channel, his hydrophones listening for any sign of the invasion fleet. His war diary for the night of June 5 notes, "Extremely heavy surface vessel traffic, but nothing out of the ordinary." The DD tanks, tucked away on their LCTs with their screens down and hidden under simple canvas covers, looked like any other cargo. The secret weapon crossed 90 miles of the most heavily patrolled waters in the world, and the enemy never saw a thing. The low, deep hum of the U-boat's manned diesel engines was the sound of history passing them by in the dark. The brutal lesson of Omaha Beach echoed through the halls of SHAEF headquarters. On June 10, 1944, a grim-faced General Omar N. Bradley met with Major General J. Lawton Collins, the commander of 7th Corps, in a makeshift office that smelled of damp canvas and mud. The numbers were undeniable. The 111 crewmen lost by the 741st Tank Battalion versus the near-flawless performance of the 70th at Utah. The verdict wasn't to abandon the secret weapon, but to perfect its doctrine. The duplex drive system worked, but its operational manual had just been rewritten in blood. Immediately, the engineers of Major General Percy Hobart's 79th Armored Division, working alongside Nicholas Straussler himself, began a frantic series of post-action modifications. At captured German workshops in Cherbourg, which still carried the faint, metallic scent of enemy occupation, they developed two critical upgrades by late July 1944. The first was a large angled steel plate, a prow, welded to the front of the hull to act as a wave breaker. The second was a more powerful compressed air system that could erect the 3.2-meter canvas screen in under 12 minutes, a full 3 minutes faster. These simple but brilliant innovations, tested in the choppy waters off the Cotentin Peninsula, effectively doubled the tank's operational capacity, making it seaworthy in waves up to 24 inches, see State 4. Brigadier N.W. Duncan ensured over 150 surviving DDs were retrofitted with these kits within just 4 weeks. The newly evolved weapon faced its next great test during Operation Dragoon, the Allied invasion of southern France, on August 15, 1944. Lieutenant General Lucien Truscott, a staunch advocate for amphibious armor after studying the Utah Beach after-action reports, assigned the 756th Tank Battalion and its 36 DD Shermans to the first wave. Learning from Omaha's tragedy, the U.S. Navy LCTs, under the watchful eye of Rear Admiral Spencer S. Lewis, launched the tanks a mere 500 yards from the beaches near Saint-Tropez. The new prows sliced through the gentle Mediterranean swell, and the tanks churned ashore with the 1st Infantrymen of the 3rd Infantry Division. Their 75mm guns silenced 4 key German coastal batteries within 20 minutes of landing. The German 19th Army commander, General Friedrich Wiese, received panicked reports of tanks driving out of the surf, a tactical impossibility that shattered his defensive plans and saved an estimated 500 American lives in the first hour. With its value proven beyond doubt, the secrecy surrounding Project Duplex Drive became even more fanatical. Under the directive of SHAEF's G2 intelligence chief, Major General Kenneth Strong, the enforcement of Protocol Bigot Neptune/Armor DD-1 was absolute. When 2 DDs from the 756th Battalion were disabled by teller mines on Alpha Beach during Operation Dragoon, a team of combat engineers under Captain John H. Miller was dispatched within 30 minutes. The area was sealed, and each 33-ton tank was obliterated with over 40 pounds of composition C3 plastic explosive, leaving nothing but twisted, unrecognizable metal. The acrid smell of burnt steel ensured the Germans would never capture a specimen to study. The British 79th Armored Division soon had its own chance to prove the weapon's worth in the grueling Battle of the Scheldt. In late October 1944, Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery ordered an amphibious assault to seize Walcheren Island and open the vital port of Antwerp. On the cold, foggy morning of November 1, 1944, DD tanks of the Staffordshire Yeomanry, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel John A. E. Hurst, slid into the treacherous tide-swept waters of the Scheldt estuary. The air was thick with the smell of cordite and the salty stench of the mudflats, but the tanks swam steadily towards their objective. They provided the decisive firepower that allowed Brigadier B.W. Lester's 4th Special Service Brigade to establish a beachhead against fierce opposition, an action that Montgomery later stated shortened the entire campaign by 3 weeks, preserving the lives of at least 200 Allied soldiers. As the war moved into the river-laced landscape of the Netherlands and Germany, the duplex drive concept evolved again. Major General Percy Hobart's engineers, working at a secret facility near Brussels in December 1944, developed a lighter DD conversion kit for the agile, 18.6-ton M24 Chaffee light tank. This new variant became an invaluable tool for reconnaissance units. On the bitterly cold morning of January 23, 1945, Captain Charles B. MacDonald of the 82nd Armored Reconnaissance Battalion led 3 of these swimming Chafees across the icy Roer River under a thick blanket of fog. Bypassing a demolished bridge, they completely outflanked a company from the German 116th Panzer Division, their 375 horsepower Cadillac Vive 8 engines barely a whisper over the sound of the current. The surprise was so complete, they captured 88 prisoners and 2 PaK-40 anti-tank guns without firing a shot, a perfect demonstration of how the secret weapon could substitute surprise for bloodshed. All the while, German intelligence remained utterly mystified. By early 1945, Fremde Heere West, now commanded by the pragmatic Oberstleutnant Johann Adolf Graf von Kielmansegg, had compiled a file containing over 20 fragmented and contradictory reports of Schwimmpanzer. One report from Italy described a quote, with a tank turret, while another from the Netherlands spoke of a quote, submersible tank. With no captured equipment, no photographic evidence, and no coherent technical analysis from Abwehr field agents, the entire file was officially stamped *unglaubwürdig*, not credible. The weapon remained a ghost, its existence protected by its own sheer absurdity. The operational climax for the duplex drive Sherman came on the night of March 23, 1945, during Operation Plunder, the monumental assault crossing of the Rhine River. This was the secret weapon's grand finale. Under the command of Lieutenant General Sir Miles Dempsey, the British Second Army amassed over 600 of Hobart's funnies for the attack. In the hours leading up to H hour, the assembly areas west of the river hummed with the sound of hundreds of idling 400-horsepower Wright R975 engines, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and diesel fumes. At precisely 2100, the DDs of the 44th Royal Tank Regiment and the Staffordshire Yeomanry slipped into the Rhine's dark 3-knot current, their commanders peering through spray-lashed periscopes at the enemy shore. The effect on the German defenders was one of pure psychological terror. The Volksgrenadier divisions under General Feldmarschall Albert Kesselring were prepared for an infantry assault in small boats, followed by the slow construction of pontoon bridges. They were not prepared for a wave of 33-ton armored monsters rising from the river like creatures from legend. The DDs swarmed the east bank near Rees, their 75mm M3 main guns spitting fire before their tracks were even fully dry. Within 90 minutes, they had established an impregnable armored bridgehead, destroying over 15 machine gun nests and 4 88mm anti-tank guns. This armored spearhead allowed combat engineers to work in relative safety, drastically accelerating the bridging operation. General Dwight D. Eisenhower's staff later calculated that the use of Hobart's specialized armor during the Rhine crossing saved the 21st Army Group an estimated 10,000 casualties. With the unconditional surrender of Germany in May 1945, the secret weapons war was over. The surviving DD tanks, their canvas screens now worn and stained, were quietly withdrawn from frontline units. The crews, both American and British, were debriefed and forced to sign non-disclosure agreements under their respective Official Secrets Acts, binding them to silence for 30 years. The remaining 200-plus DD conversion kits were crated, classified top secret, and shipped to ordnance depots like the Red River Army Depot in Texas. The swimming Sherman, The weapon that had conquered the beaches and rivers of Europe simply disappeared from view, its incredible story submerged by official secrecy. For nearly 30 years the story remained submerged, locked away by official secrecy and the cold, crushing pressure of the English Channel. The first crack in the dam appeared quietly in the late 1970s. Following the United Kingdom's 30-year declassification rule, the Public Record Office at Kew began releasing massive troves of wartime files. It was here, in the musty, climate-controlled silence of the archives, that the first clues to the Neptune deception emerged from the brittle yellowed pages of file series WO-171, the War Diaries of the 79th Armored Division. A handful of dedicated military historians, including a young Dr. Alistair Mackenzie from the University of Cambridge, began the painstaking process of sifting through these thousands of documents in the early 1980s. Working under the low hum of fluorescent lights, the air thick with the smell of aging paper and bookbinder's glue, Mackenzie stumbled upon a series of heavily redacted operational orders from April 1944. These orders, designated Top Secret/Bigot, referenced amphibious training for M4A1s and mentioned two specific American units, the 741st and 70th Tank Battalions. He cross-referenced these with after-action reports from General Dwight D. Eisenhower's SHAEF headquarters, discovering cryptic notes about, quote, unacceptable losses in specialized equipment on Omaha Beach, a puzzle that had no conventional explanation. It was the first thread of a secret that had been deliberately unraveled from the official history of the war. The full scope of the duplex drive program began to emerge as these early researchers connected the archival fragments with other newly declassified materials. The personal papers of Major General Percy Hobart, donated to the Imperial War Museum in 1975, contained his private, often scathing, correspondence with the Ministry of Supply regarding the development of the DD system. More importantly, a researcher at the UK Patent Office unearthed Nicholas Strausler's original 1941 filing for UK Patent number 549-422, complete with detailed schematics of the collapsible flotation screen. When the first articles detailing these findings appeared in niche publications like After the Battle magazine in 1985, they were met with considerable skepticism by the mainstream historical community, including the eminent American historian Dr. Stephen Ambrose, who initially dismissed the idea of swimming 33-ton tanks as a fanciful rumor. The evidence was compelling, but it lacked the one thing that could make it undeniable: a human voice. That voice finally broke its long-enforced silence in a 1984 interview for a local Ohio newspaper. Sergeant Bill Feller, formerly of the 741st Tank Battalion, was a retired factory worker in his early 60s, a quiet man who had carried the weight of his experience for 40 years. Freed from the Official Secrets Act he had signed in 1945, he described in quiet, harrowing detail the moment his tank, one of 29 launched that morning, was swamped by a 6-foot wave and sank in less than a minute. His testimony was the first public account from a survivor, a crack of thunder that announced the secret was no longer just a matter of dusty files. Feller's story, and those of the few other surviving veterans who followed his lead, provided the visceral, terrifying reality that the technical documents could only hint at. He spoke not of tactics, but of the deafening roar of water pouring over the 3.2-meter canvas screen, the stench of diesel fuel mixing with the salt water flooding the crew compartment, and the bone-chilling cold as the 33-ton Sherman plunged into the 100-foot deep darkness. His account of surviving the sinking stood in stark, brutal contrast to the sanitized language in Lieutenant General Omar N. Bradley's official after-action report, dated June 30, 1944, which simply stated that, quote, pre-landing armored support from the 741st Battalion failed to materialize due to extremely rough seas. The veterans' stories revealed that it wasn't a failure, it was a slaughter. The historical narrative finally and irrevocably shifted with the publication of Max Hastings' seminal 1984 book, Constolen, Overlord, D-Day and the Battle for Normandy. Hastings, a renowned journalist and historian, was one of the first to synthesize the newly declassified files from file series WO-171 with the raw, emotional power of veteran testimonies like Bill Feller's. His book, which sold over 500,000 copies in its first year, dedicated an entire chapter to Hobart's funnies, elevating Major General Percy Hobart from an obscure eccentric to a strategic visionary. It also cast a harsh, analytical light on General Omar N. Bradley's fateful decision to launch the tanks 6,000 yards from shore, reframing the Omaha Beach catastrophe not as an unavoidable tragedy, but as a direct consequence of a high-stakes command gamble. The secret was now out of the archives and on the bestseller lists. But the most profound, undeniable proof wasn't written on paper. It was lying in silent testament on the ocean floor. On August 11, 2002, at 14:30 Greenwich Mean Time, marine archaeologist James Delgado of the Institute of Nautical Archaeology stared at a sonar screen aboard the research vessel Odyssey. The low electronic hum of the equipment was the only sound on the bridge as a ghostly, perfect silhouette of an M4A1 Sherman tank resolved itself from the digital noise. There, 6,000 yards off Omaha Beach, was the physical evidence of the 58-year-old's secret. The expedition, co-led by Delgado and the legendary oceanographer Dr. Robert Ballard, was a technological pilgrimage to a forgotten battlefield. Using a state-of-the-art Kongsberg Mesotech side-scan sonar operating at a frequency of 500 kHz, they meticulously mapped a 4-square-mile area of the seabed. In the cold, 54-degree Fahrenheit water, 100 feet below the surface, their remote-operated vehicles didn't just find one tank, they found a graveyard. 27 of the 29 tanks launched by the 741st Battalion were located, many sitting perfectly upright on the seafloor as if still waiting for an order. The eerie, high-definition video feed sent back to the Odyssey was the final, irrefutable evidence of the scale of the disaster, the silent steel witnesses to the story the veterans had told. This discovery was the historical smoking gun. The sonar images and underwater photographs, published worldwide in a 2003 National Geographic special, were visceral and haunting. They transformed the duplex drive story from a compelling historical narrative into a tangible, human tragedy. Here was the direct, physical link connecting Nicholas Straussler's 1941 patent, Major General Percy Hobart's obsessive drive, and the 111 American tankers who paid the ultimate price for a secret weapon's disastrous debut. The sunken tanks of Omaha Beach became a permanent, chilling memorial, vindicating the veterans and silencing the last of the historical skeptics. With this final, profound revelation, the history of D-Day was permanently rewritten. The dramatic disparity in casualties between Utah Beach, with its 197 losses, and Omaha Beach, with its staggering 2,400, was no longer a simple matter of stronger German defenses. It was now understood as a complex and tragic lesson in the application of secret technology, a story of how one commander's adherence to doctrine at Utah saved lives, while another's gamble against the laws of physics at Omaha led to a catastrophe the enemy never even knew had happened. The revelations brought a slow but profound wave of official recognition. On June 6, 2004, the 60th anniversary of D-Day, President George W. Bush specifically honored the forgotten tankers of the 741st Battalion in his official address. For the few surviving veterans like Bill Feller, it was a moment of bittersweet vindication. The 27 sunken M4A1 hulls were officially designated as protected war graves by the French government, their exact coordinates now marked on maritime charts. The crisp, lonely sound of a bugle playing taps over the waves off Omaha finally gave a name to the sacrifice of those 111 men. The historical narrative of D-Day was permanently altered. Esteemed historians like Dr. Stephen Ambrose, in later editions of his 1994 masterpiece, D-Day, had to significantly revise their analyses of the Omaha Beach landings, shifting focus from German strength to the catastrophic failure of the D-Day launch. Major General Percy Hobart, once a footnote, was now celebrated as a strategic visionary, his portrait hanging in the Royal Tank Museum at Bovington, not far from the actual beaches at Studland Bay where the training took place. Today, that 3-mile stretch of sand, Area X, is part of a national nature reserve, but small, weathered concrete pillboxes from the training era still stand, half buried in the dunes. The salty wind whipping off the channel feels like a whisper from the past, a reminder of the thousands of young men who practiced here in secret. The 400 casualties at Omaha were no longer just a statistic. They were the direct, tragic consequence of a high-risk gamble involving a 3.2-meter canvas screen and the unforgiving laws of physics, a truth that took over 30 years to surface. The ghost of the duplex drive Sherman lives on in the DNA of modern amphibious warfare. The core doctrine, delivering armored firepower directly from sea to shore with the 1st Infantry Wave, became a cornerstone of U.S. Marine Corps strategy. The development of the Amphibious Assault Vehicle, AAV, particularly the AAVP-7A1 model standardized in 1985, is a direct technological descendant of Nicholas Straussler's vision. Though its powerful hydrojet propulsion system is a world away from the Sherman's twin 28-inch propellers, the fundamental principle remains identical. Pentagon strategists like General Eric Shinseki studied the D-Day program's successes and failures extensively, influencing the design of expeditionary fighting vehicles for decades. The low, powerful hum of an AAV hitting the surf today is an echo of the over 150 patents from a Hungarian genius, and the lessons learned at the cost of 111 lives in 1944. The most enduring legacy is the restoration of memory for the men who were lost. On May 28, 2005, a permanent monument was finally dedicated near the Omaha Beach Memorial at Colville-sur-Mer. Financed by veterans, associations, and private donors, its central feature is a large bronze plaque. Its cool, smooth surface, inscribed with the 111 names of the crewmen from the 741st and 743rd Tank Battalions who went down with their machines. Men like Lieutenant Colonel William D. Bill Price were no longer just statistics in a redacted report. They were honored as pioneers who died at the sharpest edge of innovation. Every year, descendants of these men gather at the site, the scent of sea salt mixing with the flowers laid at the monument's base. The underwater survey footage captured by James Delgado's team is now a permanent exhibit at the National D-Day Memorial in Bedford, Virginia, ensuring that the story of the 27 sunken tanks, their crews, and their sacrifice will never again be submerged by secrecy. And so the final image remains. 100 feet beneath the waves, 6,000 yards off the French coast, an M4A1 Sherman rests in the profound, cold silence of the deep. Its 75 mm M3 main gun points towards a shore it never reached, a silent testament to the audacious genius of Nicholas Straussler and Major General Percy Hobart. For 58 years, it held the secret of what happened at 6:35 on June 6, 1944. Now, encrusted with life, it is a permanent monument, not of failure, but of a secret so audacious, so unbelievable, that its greatest victory was simply existing at all.